Okay, so 10:35, we're back. Hope everyone got a chance to grab a cup of coffee to get into the second session of our training day. And now I would like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Silvia Maria Tabusca. Silvia is a law lecturer at the Romanian-American University School of Law, where she's the director of the Center for Human Rights and Migration and the coordinator of the Human Security Program at the European Center for Legal Education and Research at CLARE. She has been working in the field of international human rights protection for over 10 years, with a focus on organized crime and human security. Silvia is recognized as an international expert, leading consultant, trainer, and coach, working with the United Nations, Council of Europe and Greta, EU institutions, EU member state embassies in Romania, and leading international law firms and companies. Before joining the Romanian-American University, Silvia received the 2017 Professional Fellowship on Democracy and Human Rights from the US Department of State, and she was nominated for the International Award Hero Acting to End Modern Slavery in 2015. Silvia?
Thank you very much, Silvia. We very much appreciate your efforts to put us together and to talk about this very sensitive issue. It was extremely useful for me to hear the previous presentation, a very practical one. My perspective is mainly a research perspective, but also we take cases of human rights and mainly cases of Loverboy when parents are contacting us because their daughters mainly are abroad with their lover boys and they are missing for quite a long time. They don't keep the contact with the family or with their close friends. And often we help the family to identify their girls abroad. Most of the time the girls are in a lover-boy relation, often sexual exploitation and human trafficking. We also look into the cases because we are very trustful at the national level. We receive a lot of cases that are linked to corruption. For example, now we are looking and reported some cases in which members of local authorities, sometimes even police officers, are potential members of the criminal networks that exploit mainly children. So we have also this perspective of human trafficking, practical perspective of human trafficking and Loverboy. We are not working with victims of Loverboy, with survivors. Whenever we help them to come back to Romania, for example, 2 days ago, we've been able, with support of some international and national NGOs and with support of parents, to bring back in Romania a girl that is a victim of Loverboy, and it's a quite difficult situation. We referred her to an NGO that works specifically with these types of victims. So we do not offer counseling, we offer general advice to the parents and what to do further. As I mentioned, my approach, cannot change the slides. My approach will be mainly a research one, but also I refer to many cases that I personally have been looking into and I personally know very well. Last year, we had the last international report. Actually, UN report was published, and this report shows that this phenomenon of human trafficking is globally increasing. In 5 years, we have 10 more millions of persons in traffic, so 2 more million of persons every year. What actually is of interest for our discussion is the fact that 7 of 10 victims of the global level are women. Also, the report shows that most of the women are exploited sexually. Also, I have here a graph from this report that shows that also children we see in Romania, in Europe, but also at the global level, that children are largely exploited for sexual purposes, and this somehow vulnerable group is very often targeted by the traffickers. So at the global level, we have more than a half of the children exploited for sexual purposes. It was already discussed, the definition. I'll go very fast through it because somehow I will link to some aspects from the definition. In order to have human trafficking, what we see now at the global level is the challenge to make the difference between pimping and human trafficking. Unfortunately, the Romanian legislation offers an overlapping. So in Romania, it's even more difficult than in your countries or in at the global level to make the difference between pimping and human trafficking. We often consider that many cases of human trafficking are trialed mainly as cases of pimping, even if all the elements of human trafficking are there, just because we have this overlapping between definition of human trafficking and definition of pimping within the criminal code in Romania. So in order to have trafficking, we have to meet 3 elements: the act, what the trafficker is doing, and we have in general 5 acts: recruitment, transport, transfer, harbor, and receive of a potential victim. These acts may be done by the same person, but often we see that we have organized networks, criminal networks, that are working together, and most of the acts are somehow disseminated within among the members of the network, and members are specialized for a specific part of the process. For example, we have people specialized to recruit women or victims. We have persons that offer the transport from the recruitment place to the place of exploitation. We have persons that make the transfer. For example, in transfer, we often have the transporter or the recruiter that make the transfer of the victim, for example, from Romania to other country or other city where the victim is received by another member of the network. And also harboring may be done by the same person, as I mentioned, or we can have a special entity that offers harboring of the victims. For example, in Romania, it's very well known, a case that has been investigated a few times, but unfortunately, we couldn't prove that there was human trafficking. The case was investigated as pimping. For example, the owner of an hotel, he rented the entire first floor of his own hotel to someone, a private person, who brought into this hotel mainly minors. these minors were forced to prostitute themselves. The access on the first floor was able only with a special card that was offered to the clients by the reception of the hotel. The food, so the victims were not free to go out or to call, so all main freedoms were restricted. The food received by the girls on the first floor was offered by the restaurant of that hotel. But even so, it was considered a case of pimping and some other crimes. And the fact of harboring was not taken into the consideration because the owner of the hotel and also the staff of the hotel mentioned that they had no clue about the fact that girls have been exploited in that hotel. So sometimes it's very difficult to deal with these kind of cases. Once the act is done, in order to keep the control of the victims, and we'll see further, for adults, usually is a need to keep this control, to keep the victim within the exploitation, or to put the victim in an exploitation situation. And this usually answers to the question of how the victim, what kind of activities, specific type of control has been exercised by the trafficker in order to put the victim in an exploitation situation. And here we'll focus mainly on emotional dependency, which actually will meet very often in loverboy situations. Unfortunately, the international and also the national legislations in many countries in the world does not specifically mention this dependency, the emotional dependency, as a form, a mean of exploitation. And after that, we have the forms of exploitation already mentioned also. I like to mention that when we talk about children, because the children are considered more vulnerable and they too are considered not to have capacity to protect themselves, the means are not actually needed to be proved in order to have this type of crime. So it's enough to have the act and to prove that the act has been done in order to exploit that children. Also, I would like to underline, because I see often in the court decisions that the exploitation is not a final act. So if there is an intent to exploit a person, but the exploitation itself didn't happen, it's still a case of human trafficking. It's still a case of child trafficking. For example, if I taping, there is an investigation, other type of investigation, and during the investigation, there are evidence that a person is recruited or is transported for exploitation. It's enough to have this crime, even if the exploitation itself didn't happen. At the global level, we have 8 forms of exploitation recognized, already mentioned. As I mentioned, the top one is sexual exploitation. As we've seen from the global data, the largest number of persons exploited at the global level are women, and most of them are exploited sexually. We also have other forms of exploitation, labor, debt bondage. We'll see that often the loverboy exploitation is using the debt bondage also. Sometimes the girls are forced to pay some money back that they have never known about. And under the law, this is considered a debt bondage. Domestic servitude, organ removal, what we started to look at the global level is a link between networks that are working in the illegal removal of organs and global criminal networks that are exploiting girls. We know that women can be sexually exploited for quite a short period of time, about 3-5 years. After 3-5 years, that person is not useful for the criminal network anymore because she cannot offer profits. If she is freed, she can testify or can threaten the criminal network. So it seems that it started this kind of cooperation between criminal networks that are working with victims sexually exploited and networks that illegally remove the organs. What we know that victims are overdrugged and sent to hospital. Often they are sent to a hospital as without documents, so no one knows who is the person in that situation. If that clinic is part of the global networks or regional networks of organ removal, mainly in countries where legislation allows them to do that, the clinic can remove all the organs for that person. And because the person has no documents and cannot be identified, the body will be burned most of the time. We also see an overlapping between forced marriage and sexual exploitation. And another type of cooperation between criminal networks that have victims sexually exploited and criminal networks that are doing smuggling. They offer this opportunity to the migrants that are entering into European Union to get married with an EU citizen and to have a legal stay and legal access to the labor market. There are cases of, including Romanian victims, that have been exploited sexually at the European level and being forced to marry a person in order, usually, as I mentioned, citizens of third countries from outside European Union. And there is somehow a win-win. The networks of smugglers, they can offer better services to the people smuggled in EU because they can offer this opportunity for them to stay legal and to have access legally to the labor market, while the sexual exploitation network will have some money received from the person that will pay for the marriage, extra funds. When it goes to Loverboy, as I mentioned, this is the sexual exploitation is the largest form of exploitation at the global level. And what we saw based on our research done in 2018, looking into the largest and most important cases at the global level, is the fact that the Loverboy method is used all over the world. I'll mention further the 5 steps that we have identified as being common at the global level. But before going into that 5 steps, my research recently done shows that this method of Loverboy is very largely promoted. For example, at this moment, we have schools or training programs that offer opportunities not only to boys, but to girls, because we have also lover girls. We worked on a case of a lover girl, a man actually, from Romania have been recruited by a lover girl, and he was exploited in labor exploitation. We also see a lot of lover girls in the online environment, mainly to recruit boys, children. And there is often a fake account of a girl that acts as a lover girl, and behind these accounts may be men or girls too. So what we see, as I mentioned, we have this kind of programs that I would like to underline. One of the programs mentioned that the business that that person developed is developed based on Loverboy. Actually, more than 70% of the persons that are involved in this business have been the girlfriends of the owners of that business. Also, it is mentioned that none of them has been working in this adult entertainment system before. So somehow, we'll see further, they've been convinced based on the love that was developed by the Loverboys to leave away somehow their values and to accept to work into this business. So it is mentioned in the same program that my job was to meet a girl, to go on a few dates, sleep with her, test if she's quality, get her to fall in love with me. Actually, in this part of the training is very well explained how to meet a girl, how actually to see if the girl is good, is quality, because based on the personality, based on the values of a person, that person cannot be of good quality for this kind of business and can be a problem. So these kind of girls probably are not included in the business, in the Loverboy business. Here is very clearly explained how, under this part of the training, is very clearly explained how the Loverboy steps are implemented. And I underlined what the promoter of the program and the trainers of the program are mentioning. I learned the most time efficient way to meet a girl, to get them through the dating process, get them to bed, test if they are good girls or not, and begin to process of them falling deeper and deeper into love. This is my skill. So somehow the skill of this kind of persons will be to identify vulnerable women and to make them fall in love with them. And in that way, to be in love with them, to accept whatever is asked by the Loverboy. Going back to the steps of our research in 2018, we identified these 5 steps. The first one is building trust between the lover boy and the victim. We'll see that under this phase, the lover boy is willing to do whatever is needed, to spend how much money is needed in order to build trust and to be able to go further in the second phase. The second phase of the procedures is seduction. Here, the lover boy tries to be sure that the girl is in love with him and he has the control based on the emotional dependency, that the emotional dependency is created under this phase. Sometimes we'll see it may be created through an intimate relation, but there are cases when there is no intimate relation between the lover boy and the girl. It's just a way to seduce the person and to make that person to do whatever the lover boy asks her to do. The third phase is isolation for friends and family. After that, the destruction of personal values, and only in the end is the exploitation. Sometimes these phases are not followed completely. Some of the phases may miss from the procedure of lover boy, but in general, we identify that these 5 steps are used. And I'll start with building trust. The building trust is the phase in which the lover boy will stay till he or she will be convinced that the person that is recruited is trusted him or her very well. In order to build trust, the lover boy will play whatever role is needed. Usually, during this period of time, the lover boy will try to identify the vulnerabilities of the victims and mainly the dream of the victim, what actually the victim wants from the life. Once the lover boy knows exactly what are the plans, the wishes of that victim, he will build somehow a story in order to respond to the needs of the victim, to be closer and closer to that victim. And I will bring you here into attention a case that we've been looking into recently in the Ukrainian conflict context, because I have never thought about that. In order to build trust, we have an entity that came into Romania pretending to be part of the UN system of agencies. And they played the role, and they've been able to have fake documents in order to show or to build trust with the Romanian NGOs and the Romanian authorities and convince them to take children, mainly unaccompanied Ukrainian children, and relocate them to different other countries. So this can be a mean of someone that wants to build trust. They will do, as I mentioned, whatever is needed in that specific context to build trust and to be able to achieve these activities, to recruit persons or to have access to vulnerable groups. Also from the Ukrainian conflict, we received an email from a husband who was looking for his wife and his 1.5-year-old boy. His wife was recruited at the beginning for accommodation. She was had support, left Ukraine, had support in Moldova from the extended family of the husband. And after that, she met a man, and that man offered her better accommodation and work possibilities in Romania. So she trusted him and she decided to leave last year on the 1st of May, Moldova, and to come into Romania in order to have a job and to have better opportunities. The person that offered her accommodation developed a personal relation, a lover-boy relationship, trying to convince her to prostitute. However, having this, there have been few NGOs, as I know, that have been contacted by the husband. We've been able to identify in due time the wife and the boy, and somehow to help them before being exploited. But however, the idea of easy and a lot of money coming from prostitution was very largely promoted by this man that offered them accommodation and promises of good jobs in Romania. Now the family is back in Ukraine. The building trust phase can last whatever is needed. For example, in a case that is now investigated, is now under trial, actually. The investigation ended and it's in front of the courts. The building trust was very, very short. Usually it lasts long, few months, or even few years. But in this case, it wasn't so. The recruitment was done by young lover boys. They were staying in front of the high school, inviting high school girls to join them for a drink in the city. Going out for a drink, they started to become somehow friends, to build this trust. And after a few meetings, usually not more than a week, the girls were invited into to attend a private party. This private party was organized in a factory in very central area of a large city in Moldova. And the party started quite early, at 8 or 7. So the girls were easily recruited to go there because there was no need to explain to the parents that they are going to the party or to offer details. While there, the other steps we'll see that I was talking about from the Loverboy procedure are missing. They've been directly exploited. They usually received a drink in a lounge, and in that drink was used ketamine, a very strong substance that put a person in a completely unconscious situation in about half an hour. After that half an hour, the girls were invited in other room, and in that room they were exploited, sexually exploited. Everything was videotaped. by the owner of this club, of the factory. And the images have been used to threaten, on one side, the clients, and on the other side, the victims. The girls have been invited to go back and prostitute themselves whenever the network asked them to do so. And the clients were very rich men in Romania, business persons, representatives of different authorities, even police officers. In this network, there were some police officers involved also. So when the traffickers want to build trust, they will do whatever is needed to have this first step well developed. Because if this step is very well developed, then all the other steps will go very easily. The exploitation is almost done. As I mentioned, it can last very long. For example, we've been looking into a case. The girl has been recruited at the age of 16 for 2 years. She was actually crazy about him. He offered him whatever she wanted, a lot of presents, flowers. They went out in different restaurants, nice holidays. She really wanted to have a sexual relationship with him, but he didn't accept it. It was just part of his play. He told her that he respects her so much and he loves her so much, and he's not going to have any sexual relationship with her before she will reach the age of 18. Another aspect to build trust, because we perceive the traffickers as very rich, offering girls a lot of money and nice opportunities. We have also identified situations in which lover boys play the role of a very poor person. They will build trust with the victim, and will see they will seduce the victim. And after that, like in this case, they will tell the victim, you know, you deserve more. When they will be sure that the second step of seduction is clear, when the emotional dependency is very strong, the trafficker will say, well, I love you and I respect you so much, and I know that you deserve more than I can offer you in this life. So my decision, because I love you, is to quit our relationship now, because what I can offer to you is these very poor conditions in which we are living. And we see the house in the right side. That was the house in which the victim was living with the lover boy for a while. She was a minor, a student in the high school when she was recruited, 15 years old. They lived together for a while here. He decided to quit the relationship with her, and she didn't accept it. She said, well, I love you so much. I don't care about the situation, material situation. My love for you is more important. We can change it. We can do it together. We can have together a better life. So he came up with the idea to prostitute. He mentioned, well, if you want me to go further, then you can reach, have easy money, fast money, and you can prostitute for that. In reality, based on the investigation that has been done at the European level, The Loverboy had the network. There was a network, and they built the houses from the left side, and they lived, and they were owners of that huge houses. So in order to build trust and in order to convince the victims about their love and to put the victim in a very difficult decision, they can play whatever role is needed. In the other case that was investigated at the European level, we see very clear that a number of minors, most of them minors, were recruited based on Loverboy procedure, and they offered false promises of sentimental partnership and luxury life. This is the general procedure used for seduction for the second part of a second phase of the Loverboy procedure. Once the built is trust, as I mentioned, they will try to make the love fall in love with them, make the girl fall in love with them deeper and deeper, to be sure that they are completely dependent of them emotionally. And what we see is, as it was also mentioned before, we see that the victims don't perceive themselves as being exploited, as being victims of Loverboy. And this is the main challenge, as it was discussed in the first part of the training. It's difficult to be able to rescue a victim that is not aware of the situation of emotional dependency in which she or he is. The third phase is isolation. After the emotional dependency is done, we'll start the isolation, because the purpose, if we go back to definition, the purpose of all these steps is to exploit that person. And whenever we have a problem in our relationship or in our life, who are the person that we talk to? The close friends, mainly among teenagers. The friends are the most important person, the closest persons. And if the situation is very bad, we may actually talk about the situation with our family. So the next step that is used by Loverboys is the isolation of the victim, not only by the community and by the entire society, as we've seen in the exploitation phase, but this happens before the exploitation often, to put her away of friends and family. She is put away, or he is put away of her friends, using mainly jealousy. Jealousy is often used in the relation with the friends, and the Loverboy says, you say she's not your friend, she's jealous that you've met me and I love you like crazy, that we are just a perfect, we have a perfect relationship. She is not your friend, she's jealous on that. Or he will play with the best friend of the victim, the same situation, telling her that he likes her. Sometimes he can recruit the best friend of the victim without the victim knowing that her best friend was recruited by the Loverboy too. If the recruitment doesn't work, he will go with the messages or some evidence in front of the victim, telling her, you know, your best friend is writing me late in the night, so she's not really your best friend. She is trying to break our relationship, and she wants me. What usually a woman that is deeply in love with a man will do, of course, will eliminate the best friends and will stay with the lover boy that proved respect and all the aspects related to trust and real love. The next step is to create a conflict with the family, and the conflict with the family is built on different type of activities, like they went out together for a movie, for example. He underlines that the family must know that they are together, but he does not allow her to go back home at the normal time, decent time. So the girl usually is not allowed to call the family and inform the family that she will come back late in the night, or telling her, you know, you are with me. You told them that you are with me. They should trust me. And if the family will get mad and will start punishing the girl for this kind of habits, he will build the conflict with the family, telling that, well, they don't trust me. They knew that we are together. They don't like me. They don't trust you. What kind of parents do you have? So somehow they try to build a larger conflict with the family. What we have to be aware is the fact that the isolation is not seen all the time, because what the law enforcement authorities, and usually people that are not working on these specific cases, they consider that isolation should be physical isolation without any chance to communicate with other people. But in fact, the situation is not like that. It's an invisible cage that is realized in Loverboy through different methods of emotional control or different other types of control. The girl usually has access to mobiles, to internet, but because there is other type of control that affects her real freedom to talk about her situation, or sometimes, as I mentioned before, most of the time, victims are not able to perceive them as being exploited. They actually cannot ask for help. The fourth phase is destruction of personal values. Once the person, the victim, is away of family and friends, those that will be able to support her whenever she is in a difficult situation, she will be put in a situation in which her values will be destroyed to easily make the transfer from a love relationship to a situation of exploitation, mainly sexual exploitation. Sometimes this part is done through pictures and video materials. For example, Loverboy can say, well, I miss you so much when we are home with your friends, so please send me a picture with you in a nude position, or send me some videos with you in order to have you with me, even if you are home. And in this way, on one side, the values of that person's are destroyed, and on the other side, he or she will have the materials that will be used often to threaten the victim. But we see in many European large networks that the network use the violence, or the lover boy makes the transfer to other members of the network, and the other members of the networks are actually entitled to destroy the values through physical violence, through sexual violence, through different means in order to make the transit to the sexual exploitation. Here also I have some aspects from an investigation in which the lover boy himself used rape as a mean of control and as a mean of destruction of the personal values. The investigation shows that he mentioned that I can do whatever I want to you. So because there is emotional dependency, he somehow uses his control over her and impose this on her, telling her that, well, I do whatever I want to do with you because you are mine. Also, he mentioned that he loves to raping her. So watching her while he's doing that is also part of this destruction of values. Also, there is mentioned the control, as I underlined before. The control starts under the previous phase and will continue and will be developed till the exploitation part. The exploitation is the last part. After the values are destroyed, and we have different methods to destroy the values. For example, in one case, the girl was recruited and under the destruction of the values, the lover boy said, well, I'm not going to have a sexual relationship with you without bringing with you one of your friends. So at the beginning, the girl mentioned that it's a joke because she trusted him. He mentioned all the time that he loves her, so was somehow crazy for her to accept that he really wants their first sexual connection to be together with other women. But he was very tough on that, and he convinced her to do that in order to have him. Otherwise, she has no chance to go into a sexual intimate relation together. The last phase is exploitation itself. The exploitation, about exploitation, we know many things and will be discussed further during this training. Usually the girls are asked to have minimum amount of money per day. If they are not able to earn that amount of money per day, they are punished. Often the punishment is sexual and physical violence. And also under this part, there is a dependency of drugs and alcohol in order to accept the exploitation. What we see, and I haven't underlined, under the seduction part, sometimes the girls are drugged without their consent. We know that one of the drugs used is the oil of hashish, which creates the fastest dependency of a drug. So if a person put in the food or drink of another person, victim, some oil, hashish oil, the dependency is created in about 7-10 days. Often the victims want crazily to meet the lover boy because she perceives this needs of drugs as part of the relationship, or she thinks that she loves him so much and it's a need for her to meet him every day. But sometimes this need is determined by the drugs that have been used without her consent. Here is a notebook that has been seized recently, last year in June, and we see that even if the girls have been asked to have at least 1,000 euros per day, almost all the victims earn more than that in order not to be punished. We have very few victims in this notebook that earned 1,000 euros per day. I mentioned you about what the case of the girl that has been recruited and by the lover boy that played the role of a poor person. That girl was actually trying to help her sister, who was also exploited by the network, and she started to cooperate with the authorities, with the prosecutor. She was convinced during the trial by the lover boy to leave the country of origin and to go to Switzerland. In Switzerland, she was exploited in prostitution in Lausanne for about 3 weeks. After 3 weeks, her body was found in a forest in France, killed in an unimaginable way. There were 26 knife cuts on her body, and a very violent crime, actually. The authorities from France and from Switzerland were able to identify the person that was found in that forest, and to show that she was a victim of human trafficking. So sometimes these cases of lover boy can have a level of violence that we cannot imagine, like the one that I mentioned. However,
Silvia, we're going over time. If you can wrap up, I would like to open the Q&A.
Sure.
I will invite participants to start typing their questions in using the Q&A button, and you can just close your presentations so that we try to stick to the agenda as much as possible. I'll give you 2 more minutes while the participants can start asking questions.
The end part of the presentation was related to the other forms of exploitation, because in our perception, lover boys are recruiting persons, victims, to exploit them mainly in sexual field. But we have cases at the European level in which the victims have been recruited to commit crimes, or for labor exploitation, as I mentioned before. However, in some cases that involves Roma community at the European level, this method is also used, but the persons that are recruited based on lover boy are exploited in begging and also in petty crimes. So I'm happy to answer any questions if they are.
Okay, I don't see any questions yet, but I don't know if you want to pick up the slack from the previous session. There was Mihaela from Romania. Yes. Do you want to say something about that?
The prostitution in Romania is not legalized, and at least the network of NGO that our NGO has the secretariat is very much against this, because we see that in the countries where the prostitution is legalized, the number of Romanian victims is quite high, and we consider that the Romanian authorities are not able to monitor this phenomenon at this time very well in order to have prostitution legalized at the Romanian level. However, it is tolerated. So we advocated a lot in order to not to have prostitutes punished in any way at the national level, because we consider that they are victims of the society somehow and of the system, and they should be protected. But we do not have this legalized. When it comes to children, it's extremely complicated, because the prostitution of children is also tolerated in Romania. In my view is completely different, because we cannot accept to have children in pimping, for example, because we have a lot of cases of pimping where the victims are minors. As the protection, for example, in different activities is very high. For example, many of the countries does not allow a child to buy alcohol and cigarettes, considering that the child under 18 years old is not able to see what are the effects on her personal or their personal development or their future. But we accept them to prostitute, pretending that a child under 18 years old is able to see all these effects of his or her life, health, and personal development. Also in Romania, for example, a child under 18 cannot work in a call center, but can work as a prostitute, which for me is quite challenging if we look into the responsibility of the state and real protection of children.
Thank you, Silvia. I have some questions coming up. Lots of good reviews for your presentation. Indeed, it was very clear and very well explained how the manipulation takes place. There's this question about the timing of the manipulation. Loverboy says our participant usually dedicates his attention to one girl at a time or more than one. Because in some examples you brought forward, the trusting process seemed to be a full-time job. How do the Loverboy manages to make the business rentable if they dedicate years to the phase 1, 2, and 3?
Depends actually on each type of Loverboy, because we have large networks and they usually have a lot of girls. So at the same time, we have been looking into a case in Germany. The same Loverboy had 9 girls at the same time, and it was quite complicated to him to meet all of them. Of course, that the largest attention will have the newest one in the field. The others somehow know about the fact that they are cheated or that he has someone else and accept the situation. However, there was a case in which cooperating with the authorities in the Netherlands mentioned that few girls that have been recruited and under control of the same Loverboy are in a situation of exploitation. They couldn't accept this. They supported him like crazy, against the investigation. And when they found out that he actually had more than one girl at the same time, was the moment of the click to cooperate with authorities. So the jealousy was the fact that made them to talk about what's going on at the network level. The practice in general is to have more girls. While a girl is exploited, the other girl is recruited. But we also have specific cases in which the lover boy is the husband of that person, and the only person exploited is that women, specific women. So depends from one case to the other case. And yes, sometimes for these lover boys, I haven't had the chance to talk about a large case in which one of the largest networks at the European level was using this method of lover boy recruitment, and all the persons in that network have a full time job in taking care of girls and recruiting girls. When the investigation started, they also had in UK some companies used to laundry the incomes, the earnings from this crime. And they were not able to prove that the money they had in their accounts that were identifying their homes and expensive cars that were driven by them are part of a legal business. So the full job of that network was to act as lover boys.
Right. Next, I have a couple of comments about the Tate case. Just wanted to say that we chose not to focus on not to talk extensively about the Tate case because it's an ongoing case. So we wanted to use some extra caution in here. But this question from George is, did the Tate brothers use the same Loverboy method that you described with in their criminal network within their criminal wrote before in the previous sessions? She writes, the Tate brothers became role models for my students.
From the investigation, we see that they play this role of a lover boy, and in order to recruit girls and also to exploit them. Also, what I haven't underlined, and we see in the situation of this investigation, ongoing investigation, is the fact that the girls are willing to commit crimes for them. So they are emotionally manipulated in order to become traffickers. And for me, it's very difficult to draw the line if these persons that are asked while they are emotionally dependent by the trafficker to commit crimes, are they traffickers or are they victims further? For example, we have cases in which victims are allowed to come back home in Romania only if they recruit one person, because they can build trust very easily. They come back in Romania and they are supported by the network, having expensive clothes, nice bags, and so on. And it's easy for them to recruit in the community new girls, but they are forced to do that. Otherwise, they are not able to see their family, or they are not able to see their to come back to Romania, and they really want it often. So under this control, it's very difficult to draw the line. Is that person a victim or is that person a trafficker? And we see this pattern somehow, many patterns of the lover boy modus operandi in the Tate's case.
Thank you, Sylvia. There's One more question. Is there any research on how loverboys are recruited by criminal networks?
Actually, there is no real research, but we started to look into this phenomenon because what we see is that again, Romania doesn't have this kind of exploitation, even if it is under the directive, the exploitation to commit crimes. So what we see is the fact that the powerful networks started to recruit very young guys, very young, sometimes even below 18 years old, and to promise them a good life, easy money, access to girls, what usually the young boys want, in order to recruit from them. And at the beginning, child or a young teenager doesn't know exactly what are the effects of their acts. Sometimes they do not perceive them as criminal acts either. Sorry. So we have these forms of recruiting lover boys. If the yeah, it's related to lover boys as part of the network gangs.
Okay, we have Muriel asking, where do loverboys come from? She's also asking whether they are individual criminal or they operate in gangs or criminal networks.
We see all of these aspects actually. The lover boy can be anyone, as we've seen, can be a very poor, a person that plays as a very poor person, or a very rich person, a very well-known person. We have been looking into a case, a large network that acted as at the European level, recruited using Loverboy procedure from Albania, and the members, top members of the networks in Albania were perceived as very rich and business persons. All their businesses in Albania were very clear, so these businesses were used to laundry money most of the time, and they've been perceived and promoted by mass media, and everyone trusted them and appreciated them at the national level. This network was one of the Albanian networks that didn't recruited girls in Albania. So the girls were recruited from other communist countries, former communist countries, and from Central and Eastern part and Balkans, but not from Albania. So in Albania, these top gangs have been perceived as business persons, very clear, very much appreciated. And we have some cases in Romania, similar cases in Romania also, with some very well-known business persons that ended up in investigations of human trafficking using this method.
You're still muted, Silvia.
Sorry, I'll take another couple of questions, Silvia, because I see that we're quite late, and then perhaps if you have time, I'll let you answer directly in writing. Raluca Gabriela says, it seems that we need more emotional education, because this Loverboy method uses emotions and feelings and manipulation of feelings of the victims. Any strategies, any recommendations for that?
What we see in many countries, from which the victims are recruited is the lack of awareness about this method, and also education. Yes, the lack of emotional education, it's a weakness and a vulnerability for these girls. Unfortunately, in Romania, we don't do too much, but it's not only the case of Romania, it's a situation in most of the countries that have these problems with girls recruited based on Loverboy. I think that awareness and information about this procedure is extremely important, and mainly aspects related to the destruction of values, because if he really loves you, he will never ask you to prostitute. He will never share you with other men. So that is not love. If only this aspect is very well underlined to the young girls, they at least, being in that situation, will realize that it's not something normal. It doesn't matter what the explanation, what the reasons behind are, she will at least realize that it's not normal.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to read the last question. It's about the online dimension of the phenomenon, and this participant is asking whether there's strategies to face the issue of online recruitment of girls and women.
Unfortunately, we see that the number of victims, mainly children, recruited online increased hugely during the pandemic situation, because a lot of children had access to tablets or to internet, and also the time spent on internet was quite large. So probably it will be a new trend. We are not prepared to face these challenges, and also the educational system does not prepare the children to see it. This is on the recruitment part. On the exploitation part, what we see is the fact that online environment is the best mean for traffickers to exploit, and we have a lot of situations. For example, now we started research on a platform that promotes more than 13,000 Romanian and Ukrainian women as escorts. So for me, an escort is very close to an exploitation situation, and probably the half of these 13 adverts, 13 accounts, 30,000 accounts on the Romanian platform may raise some questions of exploitation at least. So it's a huge dimension. Also, if I talk about specifically of Romania, in Romania, the webcam industry is very large. So Romania offers more than 40% of the webcam industry at the global level. So if we compare, the role of a country at the global level in an industry is huge, and these webcams are not regulated, not properly regulated, and there is no will to have this properly regulated. So it's quite a huge risk, and what we see is that the girls are recruited, they accept to work as webcam because it is said that your materials cannot be accessed from Romania because the access to this material is restricted based on IP of the person that has access to our websites. So everything is very clear, put in a contract. So the restriction for IP is in Europe or whatever the girl wants. But after that, materials are used by the networks to threaten them. For example, we've met some girls that these platforms offer physical meetings with the clients, for specific girls that want to meet the clients in the physical environment. And when there is a request for a girl that doesn't want to meet the clients in the real world, they use these kind of threats. And we had some cases with girls that have been physically exploited, threatened actually with these materials to accept to meet people in Dubai. And when they came from Dubai, they have been it was an inhuman experience for them, a torture, effectively. I cannot explain in words. So somehow these webcams, we see that can be a way to destroy the values of persons, and after that to be forced to prostitute.
Thank you very much, Silvia. Thank you very much for being with
Welcome.
us today, for accepting our invitation and sharing your immense expertise on this subject. And I will break for lunch, let's say, or a snack, whatever that will be. And we'll be back at 12:15 with our next panelist, Frederik Dejonghe from Payoke. Thank you.
Getting the message across, actually, because it's human trafficking often has a very heavy sound to it, and Loverboys has quite the contrary sound to it. So it's often hard for people to combine the two together. But I think if we all paid attention this morning, it should now be already quite clear that Loverboys are indeed traffickers of human beings, and that they should be treated as such, which poses a problem still from time to time, but we'll get to that later on. I wanted to talk about human trafficking in its entirety as a starting point, because I think it's always very important to link Loverboys to the broader problem, actually. I think this was already quite well covered this morning, but I want to highlight the definition that we use here in Belgium. It's not the same for every European country exactly, but here in Belgium there are two components, legal components, to speak of human trafficking, and that's control on the one side and exploitation on the other. The definition is more or less the same in every country, but sometimes there's a small nuance added to the control aspect of it. So these two factors are essential in talking about human trafficking and the Loverboys in particular, and we'll see later on how that is implemented particularly for Loverboy victims. I'll pass through this. Just another time, I want to list the 5 types of exploitation. Silvia already spent some time on a more broad list by the UN. There's some EU regulation being debated at this time to add indeed the forced marriage. We're not yet sure how that will go in the future, I think, whether it will be implemented in the guidelines or not. I can't say, because it's definitely an interesting discussion about the forced marriages. Unfortunately, this is not the platform to have that discussion, but I'll be willing to do it on a later time. If anybody is interested, you can always reach out. Jade will provide or contact details later on. What is important for this presentation is, of course, that sexual exploitation and coerced criminal activities are 2 types of exploitation within human trafficking. Steve already mentioned that we sometimes see these 2 combined under a Loverboy control method or Loverboy exploitation method. And that's why I wanted to highlight them here. It's important to know that there are two ways of forming the control on a victim. You could do it internally, so on the inside of the victim, through creating the bonds, creating some form of affection. I think that was already quite extensively explained by both Steve and Audrey and Silvia earlier on, how that goes into work. And externally is something that in our experience we're seeing more and more actually. It can take many forms. The use of force is something that we have always seen, but the extortion part and blackmailing, yeah, we have a feeling that it's being used more and more. But I'll get more into detail on that later on when I'm talking about the impact of social media, internet, and yeah, technology in its entirety. Before I go into more details, I wanted to talk about some figures that we as a central reference point in Flanders have accumulated during these past years. So we started in 2019 as being the central reference center for Flanders, and every year we gathered information. So what was the point is that organizations, but also parents or people who are concerned could contact Payoke to signal that they had a potential lover boy victim in their vicinity or in their proximity or under their care. In 2022, we had around 111 signalizations of potential loverboy victims. Unfortunately, the real amount of victims will be much higher. Of those 111, we could not reach them all. So sometimes it's more or less anonymous, that they do not want to disclose the identity of victims, and that we have to just stand by and give some information, suggestions on how to approach the situation, and then we never hear back from the person anymore. It's not always easy to get into contact again, especially if it's a third party that wants more information, and it does that anonymously. We see that around 2/3 of those signalizations come from youth institutions. That's not to say that all victims are coming from youth institutions. So this might might create an incorrect image of the situation in reality, because youth institutions are well aware of their obligation to contact Payoke when they encounter a potential loverboy victim. Also, they are professionals, so they know better what to do, and they are better organized, so to say, than let's say a school or parents who are clueless, or if the children still live at home, the parents do not have a clue what's happening, or they don't care in the worst cases. Those kind of situations don't get to us, but that doesn't mean they do not exist. So what I'm just wanting to say when I give figures like this, I want to make clear that you have to take this with a grain of salt, and do not interpret this at face value, or just take it as reality, because we know that in reality there are more victims than these 111 that have been mentioned with us. It's just how do we reach them? Sometimes we hear about police investigations that they say we have some alternative names, alter egos for these girls, because they will not use the real names from a perpetrator's point of view. And then sometimes they ask us, yeah, do you have any idea if any of the girls that you're seeing could be linked to this guy? After they have already questioned the perpetrators, of course, and they have read through their phones and stuff. It's not always easy to identify them from a police point of view either. So yeah, frustratingly enough, we still have a quite large black spot, a black hole, so to say, that we cannot have a clear idea of how big the problem actually is. Without sounding too dramatic, of course, it's not that we have thousands and thousands of victims of loverboys in Belgium, but it's important to mention this either way. Another thing that I do not want you to take at face value, but I think is still important to mention, is that almost half of our signalizations come from Antwerp. This might have to do that we are an organization based in Antwerp, and some of the more specialized youth institutions are located also in Antwerp, who often make their signalizations and send them out our way. What is more important is that we could support 12 victims in a judicial way this year, early last year. And we see this more broadly than just supporting them as they are a civil party in the court case. This also entails other judicial problems that they might have, or we take contact with the prosecutor, especially in situations that they are seen as perpetrators rather than victims, because then they are not in a case of human trafficking, but in other cases, maybe theft or smuggling. And then we can play an important role contacting the prosecutor and explaining that they were actually victims, because sometimes in our justice system, not all prosecutors contact each other or are in communication with each other, and a victim could be victim at one time and she could be a perpetrator at another time, but actually the two things are connected. But if that is not clear from the evidence that has been gathered, then it is very difficult to know from the prosecutor's office point of view. So that's another time that we are very helpful for the clients at Payoke that we are able to help. With regards to the ages of the victims that we are supporting, sometimes they are as young as 12 years old, and around 1 in 5 is an adult when they are signaled at Payoke. After a couple of years, of course, we get more adults because the people that we were supporting from an earlier stage, they get older, but that is how life works, of course. Then 4 things I wanted to discuss today. I spent a lot of time on the introduction. I'm sorry about that. But the first point is I can be quite short about, and I have already dabbled a little in it. I have already touched the subject a little bit what I said earlier. Then the second and the third point. So what is special about the investigations? How are they approached? And what impacts the willingness of victims to support? I'll address together. It's a couple of slides, and the answers and questions are in there mixed together, because the two questions are interesting but are connected to each other. And then I'll leave you with the challenges that we're facing. And I'm quite convinced that everybody of you has at least thought about some or all of these challenges that we are facing. So I'm looking forward to your questions or remarks on my final slide with the challenges. So first question, what does Payoke do for the victims from a legal or judicial point of view? My colleagues Steve and Audrey already talked about how they work. What do the legal assistants, the legal counselors do at Payoke? They prepare the police interviews. They can look into the penal files, so the dossiers made by the prosecutor's office, and when we look into that, we can say, okay, maybe there's still something missing. If we look into a declaration made by a potential victim, we can say, okay, we know more than this. It might be interesting to have a second interview. We'll try to limit this as much as possible, because what comes before helping the police in this regard is, of course, the care for the victim. But I'll just know that that is our primary concern. But from my point of view and for this presentation, I'll neglect that a little, but know that it always comes first. And Steve and Audrey already talked about that, of course, so I try to not repeat them too much. This assistance is more than just the prep for that. There's always, or when possible, there's going to be someone of us assisting them going through these hearings or interviews. And what is very important is here in Belgium is that those are videotaped and recorded, so that if they want to interpret it at a later stage, because it's not always that clear if you have a written down statement, then you can see more how the interview took place, that they are not that suggestive to the victim, so to say. And it has a second advantage, is that there would be no secondary victimization if they have any doubts about it. It's easier to see from the video what was going on than if it's written down. So that's something interesting, I believe, in our way of working with it, from the police point of view, of course. Other than the support for those interviews, we also support them for putting themselves out there as a civil party. We will never force this, of course. Payoke can place itself as a civil party in the court cases. So from that point of view, it's not really necessary for the victim to do it. However, it does add a certain gravitas to the case and the prosecutor's case. If the client of Payoke wants to do this, because the defender's attorney is always going to try to make this as some sort of excuse, so to say, that the victims are not there, that there were no victims, that they do not even want to ask for damages and stuff like that. So it makes the case a lot stronger if we can convince a survivor to be present, or to at least be a civil party. Once again, we will not put too much pressure. We will not put any pressure actually on the victim. If she does not want to do it, she does not want to do it. It is at no point a condition for our support. So that's very important. We do not want her to feel taken advantage of again at any time. Also, if it's applicable, we'll see if residence permits have to be arranged. But that's something I forgot to mention, but earlier on, the victims that we see are mostly Belgian, and therefore it's not that necessary for us to arrange these resident permits for them. But it's something we can do. So what are the difficulties with regards to the assessment of victimhood? Again, I'll try to select what I can, from my point of view, be more specific about, because it's something that already was addressed slightly earlier. Sometimes they're very low-key or secretive about what they are doing. So it's very difficult for somebody in their vicinity to see what they are up to. The the kind of stuff that they are getting into might not be that clear. So is it Loverboy? Is it something entirely different? Of course, that will not be clear for someone who is not in contact with that person and who is not investing in a more deep relationship with that person. So that's something that we try to ameliorate, and we try to do in our relationships with the clients. But that already has been handled earlier. What is more important, I think, and I can add something too, is the victim and perpetrator line, because in some cases you have victims that it's very clear they are 100% victim, and then for police departments it's more easy to act accordingly. However, as time progresses, it sometimes happens, or it occurs, that a victim needs to do some acts, like Steve also mentioned earlier, some coerced criminal activities that make the situation more into a gray area. And this ambiguous concept makes it difficult for, on the one hand, the help providers to see them as a victim, and on the other side, for the police to treat them as a victim and not the perpetrator. However, there is something very important in this case that can help when confronted with this situation, is that if you are a victim and you have been coerced into doing some criminal activities, these you cannot be held responsible for them according to the non-punishment principle. This is something that was put into our law, I think it was in 2020. And it means, just what I said is that they cannot be held accountable for the things that they did wrong during the time that they were controlled by the perpetrator. However, sometimes it's very hard to prove this, since the control aspect, here I am again with one of those two factors of human trafficking, the control aspect is hard to prove sometimes from a prosecutor's point of view, and it will not always hold in court. However, this is a principle that still helps us convince sometimes victims to make a testimony or a declaration to the police or court, because one of the difficulties of victims coming to us is that they fear that they have done some things wrong and that they will be punished for the things that they did wrong, and it does not weigh up, it does not compare to the things that they went through as a victim of these crimes. So they'd rather just say nothing than get in trouble for the things that they did wrong. So that's a message that we want to try to get across. We know it's still not, it does not cover everything that they did wrong, however, but it's a step in the right direction, at least. Another thing that is very difficult to get victims out of their situation is the question, what do we have to offer actually? Because the situation that they are in becomes their new home, they are isolated, stuff like that. And an organization like Payoke cannot offer too much in comparison with the situation that they are coming out of, because that it's an entire life, their friends are there, and stuff like that. But I think this type of difficulty and yeah, complex kind of reasoning in their head, do I go for this or do I stay where I am? Although sometimes we feel that they know it's better, but it's just they cannot do it. But I think this problem has already been addressed earlier this morning, but I still wanted to repeat it because it's a very difficult one to work with, because you see the doubt sometimes, and just how strong these networks or these Loverboys are in pulling them to their own network and keeping them there. Another difficulty is the lack of overview that we have in situations like these, especially when someone is in multiple youth institutions. It's difficult to keep an overview of what has already happened, what is happening, and what has already been done. So that is something that we as a society, or as the youth society, so to say, really have to dig into to create a situation where there is someone who can always know what is going on exactly. Because now a lot of times the personal assistant in the youth institution, she knows some stuff, then we know some stuff from other conversations. We try to go into conversation about that, but then there's the youth court that has some other information, and after you have put everything together, oftentimes you're half a year later or something, and so much has happened already again, and it's really hard to yeah, stay on top of things that way. So that's one of the challenges that will come back later on at the end of the presentation, that we really want to ameliorate and see solved. And then something already talked about is also the lack of trust, and something that we really pay a lot of attention to. And our counselors really try to be close to a victim, to try to bond on a personal level, just to alleviate the lack of trust that they are experiencing, because trust is something that has been broken a lot of times for these victims, and yeah, it's really hard to get back into this. Okay. Then I want to look at this same problem, but more from a police kind of perspective, from an investigation kind of perspective. What I mean is that imagine that the police finds a person who is an alleged victim of human trafficking. Then they can be greeted with some atypical behavior, because normally if they encounter a victim of so it's for example a theft, the behavior of the victim will be more willingly cooperative than the victim that they will find from human trafficking. He may be confused, but there will be some willingness to cooperate, share information, and they will most of the time see the police as someone who will be willing to help them, Of course, not always, but it will be more the case this way. However, from our experience and talks with police investigators, we have seen that if they encounter a victim of human trafficking, they might not know it at the time. That's very important to add. They will sometimes show more perpetrator behavior, so to say. So there will be less willingness to share information. They will be more manipulative. They will be lying most of the time. The lying might be intentional, or it might be a consequence of the trauma that they have been through these last couple of days, last couple of months, last couple of years even. Because also mentioned earlier, sometimes it starts at a very young age, the start of whatever is at the base of their vulnerability that is going to be exploited by the traffickers. And it is this dichotomy, so the two ways of acting actually, that makes it sometimes hard for first line operators to recognize that they have a victim instead rather than a perpetrator. But one of the solutions to this is just to be a more kind, open-minded approach to everything that you are seeing as a first line operator. That's what you cannot see my mouse, but I'm pointing at the approach, everyone with empathy and as a human being line I had on my previous slide. I know this is more difficult in some situations, and it will also not work every time with these special type of victims, but however, it should be tried because we have seen in the past that it has worked for some police departments with which we are cooperating more closely. Now, I have already spent some time talking about this uncooperative behavior that is very typical of how these investigations and interviews are going. But there are other very typical things that are linked to these types of investigations. So always these human trafficking cases are going to be very time sensitive. The cases are never quite clear, and even in cases where there is only one trafficker, it could also easily take at least 7, 8, 9 months to have like the first to have the dossier ready. So it takes some time to get this done. If you know that in the meantime some victims are still being exploited, this is a very big problem, and this is one that is very difficult to solve because the police can only do as much research as they can, and some things take their time, of course. Oftentimes you are contacted by police that they have difficulty finding victims, but I already touched this problem earlier on, because they use alter egos that they know, okay, they are victims indeed, but how can we reach them? The last case that I had, for example, they knew about 13 victims, of which they only could identify 5 and could reach 3 of them. So, and only those 3 of them, of course, are seen as a signal in our statistics. So that brings us back to my my disclaimer that everything has to be taken with a grain of salt, of course, and we still have not managed to grasp the gravity of this problematic, even after working on it for a long time. Something that we have not paused very long on this morning was how these organizations of Loverboys are done. I saw it was a question asked of how they work, and I think I got something to add to that. Typically, there are 3 types of organizations that you can see, especially the first and the second. So solo guy and a cell structure is something that we see more often. The organized crime structure is more difficult to spot because they are very well organized and are not that often they are investigated by the police, but it's more difficult to gather evidence against them because they know better what they are doing and are better at hiding their crimes, unfortunately. Just a little added information about solo guys. It could be situations that they are one and they do it one time and then they don't do it anymore. So maybe they have a small payment to make and they ask their girlfriend to prostitute herself a couple of times to make this payment. Is this really Loverboy? Yes, he's taking advantage of the relationship that they have, but it is not typically, it's not the same as the cell organized of other guys who do it with who thought about it in advance. It's still human trafficking, of course. But we have other types of solo guys, like the one I referenced a couple of minutes ago, with the 13 victims. It was also it's a question that I saw earlier, so this is great to link back to that. It was in sequence of each other. So the guy was working on it. He was able to do it for 4 years, I think, before police got onto them, and he exploited the girls for 3 to 4 to 5 months. And there was always some time when they were getting fed up. Fed up is not strong enough, but really getting sick of it. And then he just let them go. Actually, that's what caught him in the end, because they wanted to testify against him, but only after the 10th person or something, because most of them really have the feeling, okay, it's done, and they want to get on with their lives. But that one time it did not turn out, and then got the ball rolling. But so to answer your question, sometimes it's consecutively that he does it with some small overlap, but it's most of the time there's going to be multiple at the same time. But these solo guys, indeed, it's a very high intense way of following up and doing the interaction with the ladies, with the with the victims. So indeed, to answer your question, indeed it's more intense, but it's still worth the cost, so to say. I'm talking from a very disconnected way about this, but this is still a very grave problem. But if you know that they can sometimes get 250 or 300 to 500 euros for one sex act, half an hour maybe, or 1 hour, it's worth the time from their point of view financially to invest it in it. Other than the solo guys, you have cell structures. We see that more often here in Antwerp. It also crosses the border to Netherlands, and it's like a clique of perpetrators, exploiters, traffickers that pool their victims together, and sometimes if it gets too heated, they will just exchange some of these girls if they're feeling that it's been too much in this region, so to say. They will just contact another cell, move her there, and that's what we have seen sometimes. These girls get exploited in Antwerp, then they go to Ghent, then to Amsterdam. So it's not really organized because it's more on a freely based, pretty loose kind of organization, and that's what sets it off against the organized crime, which is a more rigid structure of mob organization, so to say. I think we know the movies, so that's more the organized crime. I want to look at Silvia or Riada. Am I going over time already?
Yeah, I think if you can maybe round up, that would be great because we're a little
Okay.
over time.
Okay,
And then we
I'm
can
sorry.
go to the Q&A.
Yeah,
No problem.
but I have come to the end actually, so that's quite okay. So all the challenges that some of the challenges that we're facing from our Loverboy team's point of view is that we are not getting a lot of non-Belgian victims signaled to us. I'm talking about Loverboys right here, because Payoke as an organization is getting a lot of non-Belgian victims. If we do not think about Loverboys, then it's only a couple of victims each year that are Belgian actually. So that's something that we need to get a hold on, is maybe the accompanied minors that are coming into Belgium. We know there's something going on there. How can we take care of that? Then something that was touched upon earlier as well is victims that are mentally challenged or other abled. We see it from time to time, but if we look at studies from the Netherlands, that's a big proportion of their victims is going to be in that category. And when we look at our statistics, it's only very marginal. So it's something that we should look out for as well. Then other forms of exploitation of minors, there should be cases of that. We are not seeing them very often. So that's something we want to be more aware of, and want to make other people more aware of, so that we can see it better and it gets signaled better to us, because we see as of adulthood sometimes people get exploited in other ways, but we never get any signals when they are economically exploited as minors. That we never see that, and it's weird that it does pop up when they are adults. So that's something that we also have to take into account going forward. Then the problem with self-identification, Steve mentioned that earlier, so I won't go into that more deeply. Then the problematic on the overview, I also already touched upon, and given our limited time, I will not repeat what I said there. It should be clear enough, I hope. If not, ask a question afterwards. Then we have sometimes a problem if somebody is not a victim of human trafficking officially, is not recognized as one, because our support is linked to being a victim of human trafficking. It's quite difficult. Sometimes there's a nuance. We can operate for Loverboy victims who are not, but what do we do with victims if they are not recognized as victims of human trafficking. That is also a very big problem that we are faced with these days, because it happens more often than not that somebody does not officially fall into the category as a victim, or it is not possible for the prosecutor's office to gather enough evidence to make a hard claim on this. Something I want to end with maybe is the role of the online and technology component and social media. Is that it has a double role in this whole problematic. Is that it's one way it works as a catalyst. So the whole process that Silvia mentioned earlier really can go so much faster using technology and social media, which makes it so much more difficult to have early detection from the helping the counselor's point of view and all the people in their vicinity. So that's really a big problem. And that's why it's important to support minors and everybody actually with how to address social media, how to act there, how to respond to certain messages that you get from people you might not know. But social media also and technology also works on another level. It could be its own platform for exploitation in its own. And that's something that that's really on the rise here in Belgium. From our point of view, at least, when we started this center, the Loverboy Central, in 2019, we didn't see it that often as a form of exploitation in itself, but now we have seen multiple cases of the exploitation happening online even, and that's also something that we want to address in the future. I'll end there. The security for victims is quite clear. I think it's always a problem if someone wants to make a declaration that they fear for their lives because these organizations, if they are cell or organized, or even if it's a solo person exploiting them, they fear for represalias, and not only against them, but also against families sometimes. So that's something that we have difficulty confirming for them. We cannot always guarantee that they will be secure. So that's difficult to have that talk with our clients. Okay, I went through it rather quick. So I hope everything was still clear. I think there's room for questions. And also, if you want to talk to me, if I have more information about something that I mentioned, any of the points, you can always reach out to our organization and we'll just answer whatever question you have.
Okay, thank you, Frederik. We already have 2 questions from Yasmin, who works at Begeleidingshuis van Zelst. Her first question, so she's saying she works at a professional setting where they have several girls of whom they think they're being groomed or victimized. And she's asking, how do we contact Payoke and what is the information that you need to know? Do you just need to know their names, or do you need to have any context information about the reason they think they are in danger?
Yeah. Well, you can already contact Payoke in an anonymous way. So if you just want to spar about the problem that you have, just have our insight on what you should be doing or how you can approach a situation. You can do this in an anonymous way. We will not force you to share the names. However, going forward, it's it's really easier for us if we have the name and dates of birth, because we can check some things with regards to research or investigations that is already going on. Also, if another organization has some doubts about the same person, we can link it to each other, and we can more easily connect the information. You can send an email to traffickinglbtp@payoke.be, or you can just call the general number, and they will put you through it, somebody of our team. If you send an email, we will just call you back and have a little talk about the problem.
Okay, thank you. Another question by Yasmin is, how can we share information of places where girls are hanging out and come back with stories that are not okay? And she's specifically asking about how to share this information with Payoke and Child Focus.
Mm-hmm. I think Van Saalt is already also in talks with police. If I'm informed correctly, there's also a good relationship with the police. So I think it's, in first case, it's important to notify them with information that you might have that is already rather concrete. But sharing information with us is also allowed, thanks to the shared confidentiality that you have with regards to some clients. However, to do this in a structured way is rather difficult to answer this at this time. But it is something that that I will take up with you, Yasmin, then at a later time, maybe. If we can see how we can structure this, if that's okay.
Perfect. Another question by Muriel is, what is your duty of confidentiality towards the victim you help at Payoke?
Mm-hmm. That's a very important question, because it's something that we have discussions on from time to time still. Yeah, sorry, I was getting distracted by reading other questions. So we always, at the beginning of our talks with clients, we will explain to them that we have a confidential, certain confidentiality with them. However, that's something that happens from time to time, actually. If that we do fear about their physical integrity, so to say, then we do not have any, there will be no doubt in our acting. We will contact the police and share that information with them. But as I said earlier, the well-being of the victim comes first. So if we do not think that the victim, we will adhere to the law, of course, but if you do not think that it will be in the benefit of the victim, we will not share information if it is not wanted. Especially if it is with a minor, there are some special extra restrictions according to that. But it's not that if they've done something like smoked a joint or something, that we will notify the youth quarters. That will not happen. So confidentiality is still something that is very important, unless their own integrity is at stake or the integrity of someone else. Then we will act, and we will not hesitate, and they know that. So they do not feel betrayed, hopefully, if we do act on it.
Our next question is by Elena from the partner organization ACRA, and she's wondering how is the referral mechanism structured with regards to schools? Does it include outreach activities or training for educational staff?
Well, we do sometimes have trainings for staff and CLB medewerkers. I do not know how I should translate that, CLB, so you can type it if you have found it. It's something that supports schools with something that is not strictly school-related business. And it's not really structured as in the form that it's like a form that you have to fill out. So it's only if you have, actually the referral mechanism works that everybody who has a strong idea of someone being a victim of a Loverboy, they have to contact Payoke. They can do it through mail, they can do it through telephone. But actually, if you have the opinion that someone is taken advantage of, or even stronger, is in danger, then you actually have to call the police already legally. So it depends on the specific situation, how big is the danger, how acute is the danger that they are confronted with. Unfortunately, the outreach aspect is something that we do not do already. It's something that we would love to do, more outreach. But at this time, we do not have the budget or the time to do it. All our time is now focused on the assessments and the support of the victims in itself. But we do make some time for trainings and stuff. Outreach, however, would be a nice thing to do in the future. So I hope next time that we have something of this sort, Elena, we might say that we're doing outreach activities. It's at least something that's on our scope to do. Okay, thank you.
I think we'll have two more questions and then move on to the next speaker. But we have one question with regards to the online exploitation. Specifically, she's asking, social media can function as a platform for exploitation, but also as a platform for self-identification. Which platforms should be looked at more closely, and how can we use social media to facilitate self-identification?
That's very good that you asked that question, because we're working on a campaign in that regard that focuses on identification and self-identification. And the campaign will be going on TikTok, because yeah, if you're talking about self-identification, a lot of these victims are quite young, so that means that you have to use the platforms that they are using. So a self-identification campaign on Loverboys, especially younger, because it's going to be especially younger victims, it would not have that much effect if you do it on Facebook. So the platforms that we see are mostly used now are TikTok and Snapchat as well, and Telegram, but those are more difficult to implement a kind of self-identification campaign. But it's something that we are really, it's going to be really a focal point of our work to do that towards the future, is to implement more awareness on social media in that regard. So that's a good question.
Okay, our last question is by Christina, and she's wondering whether there's any research regarding to the Loverboy methods in relation to organized crime. So you were talking about the three distinctions.
Yeah, that's not something I thought of myself. So it's good that you asked that question. It gives me the opportunity to refer to the research. The research comes from Vier, I think, in the Netherlands. It's either that or CKM. I can provide that. I have it on my computer somewhere. And I think I forgot to mention it earlier, but the reason that our organization got this this central contact point for victims is because of the shockwave that the report of Child Focus created in 2016. And in that report, they examined the whole situation regarding Loverboys in Flanders, and they also refer to that research in the Netherlands. And they could also distinguish different types of traffickers and how they organize their structures and how they organize their exploitation. So it's in both of those researches.
Okay,
thank
thank
that
you.
answers questions. Yeah. No problem.
Thank you for the interesting presentation. Next, we have Héloïse who works as a policy advisor at Child Focus, the organization that Fred was just talking about, who did the interesting research a couple of years back. Héloïse will talk about good practices on identification and protection of minor victims of sexual exploitation. So Héloïse, if you want to take the floor, it's yours.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm just, now that Frederik has disconnected his PowerPoint, I'll be able to put mine. Okay. Okay, do you see my PowerPoint now?
We do.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you very much for inviting Child Focus to this training. It's a pleasure for me to be able to participate as a panelist to this training. And as you can read, I'll be talking about our activities at Child Focus in the field of sexual exploitation of minors in the prostitution, with a special focus on the Loverboys phenomenon, which is the central topic of this training. So here's a little overview of the topic we are going to go through today. The Loverboys phenomenon will be the main part of my presentation, of course, but I think it's interesting before that to introduce you briefly over Child Focus. So for those who don't know Child Focus, we are an independent private organization which works 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Our mission is twofold. We work on disappearances of children on the one hand, and on sexual exploitation of children on the other. Amongst missing children disappearances, we encompass child abductions cases, also runaway cases, and abduction by a third party. And we also distinguish amongst sexual exploitation of children, the online aspect and the offline aspect. We work on 3 levels of actions. We work on an operational level, on a prevention level, and we also do advocacy. So as I said, our target group is children, so minors until 18 years old. And concerning the disappearances, the missing people, we have an exception until 24 years old if the disappearance meets one of the worrying criteria present in the legislation, in the Belgian legislation, which is a special directive. Another important aspect is who reports cases of disappearances, missing children, and sexual exploitation. Well, there's the police, parents, families, family members, teachers, and also youth counselors. And of course, sometimes also the youngsters, the children themselves, but we will see later on that it's very rare that the victim contacts us in cases of sexual exploitation in the prostitution. We have disappearances on the one hand, and our other mission is sexual exploitation of children. When we speak about sexual exploitation, we make a distinction between online and offline sexual exploitation. Amongst online sexual exploitation, we have received in 2017 the competence to analyze child sexual abuse material, which is commonly known as CSAM. And so we have case managers at Child Focus who are analysts who are trained to analyze CSAM that is reported to us by citizens via our civil contact points. So that's a big part of our work concerning online sexual exploitation. But besides, we also receive each year hundreds of reports of other phenomena of online sexual exploitation, such as grooming, cases of grooming, of non-consensual sexting, and also sextortion. And what we see very clearly in these cases is that there is more and more a link between online sexual exploitation and exploitation in the prostitution. By offline sexual exploitation, we mean, of course, exploitation of children in the prostitution. So to give you an idea of the number of cases we treat, we deal with at Child Focus in relation to prostitution, we received in 2022 63 new cases of sexual exploitation of children in the prostitution. And the victims were between 12 and 17 years old. The majority of them were girls, but of course this doesn't mean that there are no victims who are boys, but it's just that it's they don't arrive, they don't reach out to our organization. And we also noticed, and that is a trend that we observe year by year, is that there's a strong link with our runaway cases that we open at Child Focus. And amongst these cases of minors in the prostitution, we noted in the last year that teenage pimps or loverboys played a role in 37 cases amongst the 63 cases. We observed transnational aspects, and the reporting came mostly through emergency services, parents, and the police. So let's get now into the heart of the matter. So yes, the Loverboys, in the popular culture, pimps are often known under the name of Loverboys. But at Child Focus, we are distancing ourselves from this term because it has a romantic connotation, which is too reducive. It does not represent the complexity of the problem, which is actually truly based on manipulation, isolation, and sexual exploitation of teenagers. So in French and in Dutch, we found an appropriate term, which is tienerpooiers in Dutch and proxénètes d'adolescents in French, which is not as easy to translate into English, but notes that During the presentation, I will refer to loverboys as pimps or teen pimps. You learned earlier today that a teen pimp is actually a human trafficker, and here on the slide I suggest you, well, Child Focused suggests to give a definition of what a teenage pimp is. So I'll let you read it. A teenage pimp is a human trafficker who intentionally makes teenagers dependent and affectionate on an emotional level, and afterwards, through deceit, coercion, physical and psychological violence or abuse of vulnerability, exploits them in the prostitution. An interesting question is, why did Child Focus decide to explore a few years ago this phenomenon? Well, it was, you have to know, maybe the other panelists told it to you before this morning, but in Belgium, this phenomenon was first observed around 6 or 7 years ago. At first, it seemed to be only identified in the northern part of the country, in the Flemish part of the country, and then we started to observe a general sort of generalization of the phenomenon to the whole territory. And actually, to give you a bit of context, the reason why we decided to conduct in-depth researches on that phenomenon at Child Focus is that in June 2014, there was a sort of turmoil that arose in Flanders, if I must say, when it was heard that 2 young girls of 14 and 15 years old had to spend 2 nights in a row in an Antwerp's police cell as a refuge. And it appeared that these 2 girls were often running away, and it was thought at first that they were involved in drugs and prostitution. They were considered as problem teenagers. But deeper and deeper as we digged into the case, it appeared actually that the practice of the so-called Loverboys was intricately linked to these 2 girls. So this was at that time a heavily mediated case that came to light in the summer and brought a lot of problems to the surface. We realized that there was much more behind it, that there was a lot of things that we actually didn't know around the Loverboys issue. We didn't know much about it, about its extent, about the profile of the victims, the authors, etc. It was actually at that time a gray zone in Belgium. And so that's why we decided at Child Focus to conduct a study in Flanders in 2015 about the Loverboys, the pimps issue. And then in 2020, we directed another research in Brussels. So pimps in numbers, you already know probably that it's very difficult in Belgium at least, and I think it's also the case in other countries in Europe. It's very difficult to know the exact numbers of victims of teenage pimps. There's no centralization of data at national level in Belgium. So the only numbers I can share with certainty is the number of opened cases at Child Focus. And last year it was 37 new opened cases concerning victims of teenage pimps. And we make a categorization of these cases between effective victims, informative questions, and serious suspicions. Informative question is when a psychologist calls us in order to have more information on the phenomenon, for example. About the profile of the victims, the infos I'm going to share with you today are the infos that were found in the two studies that we conducted in 2014 and 2020. But it's important to, first of all, to say that the vision of Child Focus is that every youngster, every teenager can become a victim of teenager pimps. So there's no typical profile, but still the studies that we have directed in Belgium, the many interviews we had with respondents for these two studies clearly show that there does not exist a unique profile of victims of teenager pimps. The victims differ in various points. Each of them has a background, a story, or a problem that is very proper to them. But there is one common denominator between all the victims. It is an intense desire of a better or a different life. And the desire of this different life is not only explained by socioeconomic deficiencies or major social and emotional deprivation. And it is precisely this desire which renders them extremely vulnerable to the ingenious strategies, so to say, put in place by the teenager pimps. And it's also important to underline that at Child Focus, as an organization specialized in the disappearance of children, runaways of children, we noticed that there is very often a link between a runaway case and sexual exploitation by a teenager pimp. So the three major profiles of victims that have been identified during our studies in Flanders and in Brussels in 2020 are the following that you can see on the slide. The first type of profile are the girls who stay or have a background in youth care institutions. These girls suffer from a personal development which is incomplete. They often had a dramatic history made of precarious or marginalized family situation, marked by a lack of affection and a lack of intellectual stimulation, but also loneliness, social isolation, or school difficulties, sometimes leading to the fact that they often miss school. It can also be even worse in some cases with parents addicted to drugs, insalubrity housing, suspicion of incests. So here, in short, we speak about young girls whose parents abandoned any form of responsibility towards their children, and against which children need to be protected. And so they are placed by the judge in a youth care institution, or so by the judge, either by the judge or in consultation with the family. So that is the first profile that we identified in Belgium. The second one is the girls who grew up in wealthy families. And so here in the context of urban gangs, for example, the teen pimps concentrate their activity on minors from the southern suburbs of Brussels, which are wealthier neighborhoods. These girls are more rebellious and want to break up with their friend lives. And so they are more attracted by the bad boy type, by the bad boy profile, and they carefully try not to attract any attention on themselves. They don't run away, for example, as opposed to the previous type of victims. They are not missing school too much. That is what we noticed in the interviews we made with respondents as well. And they tend to see themselves more as escorts, and don't make the link with prostitution or any form of sexual exploitation. And this second type of profile, we saw it in Brussels clearly, but we didn't see it in Flanders at the time we made the research. So this is something that appeared clearly in Brussels, but less in Flanders. And the third type of victims are victims of international human trafficking. The way pimps will recruit Eastern European girls is similar to the way local girls are recruited, but the main difference with them is that here they are minor girls who once they are major are employed in the streets and window prostitution. And in the context of Eastern Europe, the emotional attachment lies on the idea to create a couple. The pimp making the girl believe in a new life in another country, and this notion of couple is a big difference with the other profiles described earlier. Here the victims' motivations are more socioeconomic also. But I think you had a thorough explanation of victims of international human trafficking earlier this morning, so I won't dig into this too much. But so here you have an overview of the three main profiles we were able to identify in our two researches. Here a slide to explain to you the main characteristics of potential victims of PIM. So who are the fragile profiles, so to say. These are some elements which, even if they are not shared by every victim, of course, they can indicate a possible victimization. I let you read it on the slide. I think you already had an explanation on this earlier this morning, but it's not bad to have a sort of a recall. And then, yes, also important to say that I often speak about girls, but there are also boys who are victims, who can be victims of lover boys, of teenage pimps. But at Child Focus, we receive very, very few reports of victims who are boys. But you also had this morning, I think, a very interesting presentation by other panelists about the gender dimension of this phenomenon. So I won't dig into that aspect too much, but know that it concerns both genders. About the victimization signals, here you have indicators. It's not a checklist, of course, it's rather indicators, and they are not exhaustive, but they are signals that we recognize often when we open cases of victims of teen pimps. They are the main signals, the main indicators, and if several of them are encountered in a specific case, our case managers will tend to consider them as red flags, and they will be very attentive to check and double check whether it's a case, whether there's a possibility that the victim is a victim of a teen pimp. Of course, these signals are non-verbal, so it's important to say it, because as first line actors, it's very important to know that that we have to be very cautious about these signals that will manifest themselves in very different ways. Now a main obstacle in the struggle against teen pimps is that there is little or no awareness by the victims themselves of their actual disadvantaged position in the sexual exploitation game played by the perpetrators and the clients. So we call it a very problematic self-identification. So yes, young girls refuse to consider themselves as victims, which will lead to silence and banalization, and ultimately to the fact that there is very few reporting of these cases by the victims themselves, who will tend to see themselves more as escorts than victims of sexual exploitation. About the profile of the perpetrators, so the teen pimps themselves, we don't know a lot about the pimps themselves, actually, about their profile. What we know is that they are young, and that they act in networks, but also individually. And their motivations is money, of course. It's less risky to engage into exploitation of minors in the prostitution than drug trafficking or arms trafficking, for example. But yes, we don't know a lot about their profile, actually. And there is a professor from a Belgian university who is actually conducting at this moment a research on the perpetrators, on the lover boys themselves, and I think it will be very interesting to have the results of this study to know more about the profile of the teen pimps. But yes, know that they are very young. They are younger and younger. In some cases, these cases are marginalized, but in some cases, the teen pimps are minors themselves. We had in Belgium certain cases like that. It's not the majority, of course. It's still a minority, but it's important to know that. And about the modus operandi, I think you already had a thorough explanation on this morning, but important to recall it again. Important to remember that the pimps have what we call a sort of sixth sense. And what they are going to do is to fill in a part of the victim's personality which is lacking, actually. And here you have a sort of scheme that represents this dynamic. And you see in the first circle, which refers to a stable personal development. The second one, in contrast, refers to an unstable scheme of development. For instance, young girls who live or have a background in youth care institutions. And actually, the teenage pimps don't find their victims randomly. They will focus consciously on certain profiles through the hawking method. They will actually adjust their method in accordance with the victim's profile. And in accordance with what is missing to these girls in their lives, the so-called missing piece of this that you can see in the scheme, they will put everything in place in order to fill in this empty part, which is represented in the last circle in blue. About the recruitment method, I won't explain this into too much details either, because you already had a very detailed presentation on that specific topic this morning, but just to remind you that there are different types of there are different steps that will lead to the final exploitation. The first one is the hawking phase. The second one, the grooming phase. And what we observed last year in our cases at Child Focus, that we observe more and more cases in which the victims of teen pimps recruit friends of them while staying in youth care institutions. This is a trend that we observed several times last year, which is important to point out, I think. It was already mentioned before, but during the grooming phase, and even the hawking phase, the role, the internet, social media play a very important role. And so yes, now with these social media, the hawking and grooming phase can speed up, really, can occur in 24 hours. So we have to be very cautious about that. And then you have this third step, which is the isolation phase, which will lead ultimately to the exploitation of the youngster in the prostitution. I think it can be interesting now to explain to you the role and added value an organization as Child Focus can have when receiving reports of victims of pimps. First of all, important to note and to inform you that Child Focus acts as a complementary actor in the fight against sexual exploitation of minors in the prostitution, and even in our disappearance cases. Complementarity is the main is our main added value. Actually, we don't substitute to the police, to the prosecutor, or to the youth care sector. This is not our role. We are certainly a victim support organization, but we don't play the role of an investigator. What we do is that we give support to parents. We collaborate with the police and with social services. We share some important information, and we assume a bridge and a relay function a sort of liaison role, and of course we offer an emotional support, which is something that the police does not have the time to do. So complementarity, collaboration with law enforcement authorities, and in that regard, note that in Belgium we have a collaboration protocol between Child Focus, the police, and the judiciary, which obliges us to, when we receive a testimony, for example, in a disappearance or a sexual exploitation case, we have to refer it to the competent law enforcement authorities. And if the police receives an important information regarding the disappearance of a child, they have to deal it with us also. And what we also do in these human trafficking cases, teen pips cases, that we refer sometimes the cases in which there is a serious suspicion of exploitation to specialized human trafficking organizations such as Payoke, Surya, Pagasa, which are the three specialized accredited organizations in human trafficking in Belgium. So we work closely with them in cases of sexual exploitation of minors in the prostitution, when there's a link, a possible link with a teen pimp. And what we also do is that we explain the phenomenon to any person, any instance, any authority that has a question, an inquiry about the teen pimp phenomenon. So yes, it can be teachers, parents, it can be the police, or other people, children themselves. So our case managers will answer the phone to answer all these questions. So here is a case that we encountered at Child Focus, that was reported to us 1 year ago. It will give you an idea of a typical situation that we encounter as case manager at Child Focus. So this was the case. I'll let you read the slide. It was a case in which we were called concerning a 15-year-old girl, which was already followed by the youth care services, but she ran away for the first time. Then the case manager talks with various people involved, the parents, the social services, the police, and step by step she will understand, the case manager will understand that this young girl, Mila, has got problematic sexual behaviors with boys. Which means many explicit sexual messages sent to different men, sometimes adults way older than her, that she has sexual relationships with a lot of men, that she often misses school also. And after that, Mila will be found back in a hotel with adult men. So we found out at Child Focus that she was sexually abused, but that there was actually no sexual exploitation as such. So after ensuring that an investigation was carried out regarding the facts of sexual abuse, and that the young girl was taken care of by the competent authorities, we closed our intervention. But after that, it turned out that Mila ran away repeatedly. And then there was evidence that she was consuming drugs and that she suddenly had new friends. And it is during one of her last runaway episodes that Child Focus received a testimonial following which Mila would be part of an escort network. So in this type of case, which is a typical case of a victim of teen pimp, what will be the concrete role of Child Focus, to give you an idea of what we have to do, of what is our added value. During each of her runaway episodes, we had the case managers had to be very vigilant for signs of sexual exploitation. So this is something that we are very careful about when treating these cases. And we make sure that the important information that we receive are in the good hands, so that everybody takes care of the victim, and that every competent authority has information in their hands concerning this victim. We give psychosocial support to parents, but know that we are a crisis a crisis center, so to speak. So we do not offer psychosocial support on the long term. So we are really acting in the crisis phase of the case. For further psychological support, we will refer to a specialized organization such as Payoke, for example. What else? We share suspicions we have to the police and to the prosecutor. We have contacts with the youth counselor, if there is one, to inform him or her of the concerns we have about the victim or the potential victim. We always check signals, and if needed, we have contact with specialized organizations such as Payoke. And we establish a close contact with the victim where possible, which we call at Child Focus a lifeline. Yes. And what also should be important for the police to do, because there's the role of Child Focus on the one hand, but it's very important in some cases, and especially cases of victims of teen pimps. It's very important that the police be careful with certain key elements. First of all, the celerity is very important. So it's important to act quickly. For example, when victims want to make a declaration, which is quite rare, but when it's when a victim says, "Okay, I want to be interviewed. I want to make a declaration." It's important that the police, the prosecutor, acts quickly. Because in these type of cases, victims can change their minds very quickly due to different types of factors. And it's very essential that law enforcement authorities, that the police, the prosecutors do not interpret this as not being cooperative or unreliable when they change their mind. Confidence in the police drops as it gives the feeling of being not important. So with that regard, again, celerity is important. Important when the victim has committed a runaway episode, to interview the victim upon her return, because what we notice is that we can get some information, some crucial information on the return of the victim with regard to a potential sexual exploitation case. And also take identity of other persons the victim was with when she was found after her runaway episode, because very often it has a link with a teen pimp situation. Other tips regarding the police, regarding what the police should ideally do. Be careful with the signs of human trafficking in a runaway case, assessing the seriousness of repeated runaways, referral to child focus also when needed. Continue to see the victim as a victim. This is very important. And this is something that the police doesn't do always in Belgium, at least, because, as I said before, we assist to more and more cases in which the victim of a network of teen pimp network will recruit other victims herself. And even if the victim will recruit some victims in the network, this doesn't mean that this young girl doesn't have to be perceived as a victim. So that's something very important in all the judicial process as well, and in the way the victim will be treated in the procedure. So I think I'm running a bit out of time, so I will just close my intervention with the prevention aspects on which we work at Child Focus, which is a central pillar of our work at Child Focus. And we developed a very interesting tool. A very interesting prevention tool at Child Focus, which is called Girl Power Squad, GPS. And we developed this tool actually to enable girls to see clear in the method of PIMS. It's a tool designed for institutions specialized in youth care, and it offers to supervisors information on the dynamic of PIMS, and supervisors will be able then to think together with the girls around the PIM phenomenon, but also around friendship, relationships, sexuality, limits, resilience, self-image. And by using different methodologies, what we want to do by this tool is to transmit, first of all, positive norms and values to the young girls, and it's only in a second phase. So in the last phase, the fifth phase, that we will zoom on the abuses and the exploitation aspects, so the PIMS aspects. So that's why the PIMS module is only addressed in the last phase. Yes, so that was something interesting I wanted to talk to you about. The prevention aspects, very important. And we also do some policy work, advocacy work. But yes, I won't enter into details in what we do concretely. I thank you very much for your attention. If you have any question, I will be happy to answer them now, but if we don't have enough time to to answer all questions, you can always contact me at the following address that you can see, email address that you can see on the screen. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Héloïse. I think that's a good idea. We did receive a couple of questions, but we need to close. It's been a long day, so here's your email address. Participants can also reach out to Payoke at project@payoke.be if you have more questions. We will redirect your questions to the speakers. So time to wrap up, and for quick acknowledgement. So first of all, to all our speakers today, you were wonderful. Thank you for being with us and sharing your expertise. I would also like to thank the teams, first of all, the Payoke team, and the colleagues from the project partners of LILA, especially APD, and the Ultima did all the communication work, most of the communication work for this event. And I would also like to take a moment to express our gratitude to the institutions that are making this program and our support program possible. Let me mention the Flemish Ministry for Youth Policy and Well-being, who is the donor of the Loverboy, of our Payoke Loverboy teenage pimp trafficking team, and of course the European Union that is co-funding the LILA project. And this is very important to us because this is the first European project, international project, the first international funding we get for a program revolving around the low-boy trafficking. We made other attempts in the past to submit proposals on loverboy trafficking, and they were refused, they were rejected. And remember, once one of the comments we got from the evaluator was, "Oh, but you're catering to a niche." And so today we had more than 250 registered participants, more than 100 participants participating in this event. I think we demonstrated that this is not a niche. It's a very broad phenomenon, and it's very worrisome, and it deserves of all our attention. So thank you so much for being here today, and please stay in touch.